Hello there, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today is Halloween. Happy Halloween. Incidentally, my favorite holiday, and also a favorite holiday of Frank Zappa's, who I will be talking about a little bit later in this video. The theme of today's topic of discussion is scary prog albums. Now, I can't say that I've heard every single scary progressive rock album. In fact, there are many on this list that I'm not including, and that's primarily due to lack of familiarity. Not that I haven't heard them or heard of them, but just that I haven't listened to them a million times, like I have the following 10 or so titles. So let's get started. So first up, I'm going to talk about Pawn Hearts by Van der Graaf Generator. And I did an extensive look at Pawn Hearts on my channel, which you can check out. I'll include that video as a recommendation at the end of this video. But Pawn Hearts is quite simply one of the most unhinged and psychedelic horror prog records in creation. And, you know, you can look at a track like Manurg, which seems to be a song about good and evil being balanced within the same person. And there's this edge of schizophrenia even in the music itself, when about halfway through it, it just explodes into this sax madness. After the song leading up to that point was pretty much just a ballad. And then, of course, you have the gothic masterpiece that is A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, a 20-minute excursion through dreams and a nightmare at sea and ghosts and specters scratching on the windows and coming back to haunt the living. And it contains some wild performances from all members of the band, but especially Peter Hammill. And a normal Peter Hammill performance, you're going from whispers to shouting in the space of a phrase or a sentence or a lyrical idea. But this is definitely one of the most intense performances in terms of vocals from Peter Hammill. Now, you could look at Peter Hamill's solo career for some other scary moments, especially the album In Camera, which came out in 1974. But almost the entire second half of In Camera is taken up by a two-song suite called Gog Magog, which is a very intellectual but still terrifying look at the psyche of Satan. Kind of what makes it so scary to me is that Peter empathizes with the mythological Satan and kind of portrays his loneliness. And, you know, to me, there's nothing more terrifying than finding out somebody that you thought was evil has human qualities and things that you can relate to. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in scary prog music and you like Van der Graaf Generator, to go check out the In Camera album. It's a very gothic album in general, but that second side is some pretty scary stuff with some great and intense drumming from Guy Evans, being the other star of the show. So up next on my list of scary prog albums is one that has been mentioned on the internet several times as being one of the scariest records ever made, one of the darkest records ever made. And this is from a Belgian group called Univers Zero. And for the purpose of this video, I'm highlighting their second record, Heresie. And Heresie, how do I describe this? This is like Stravinsky and Bartók if they grew up on Jimi Hendrix. And I don't think there's really any guitar in it. It's just very dark and psychedelic, and it's very, very based in kind of like the chamber music tradition of, like, you're hearing a lot of bassoons, harmonium, and violins, and kind of more textures that you'd associate with modern classical music, but very much with like kind of a riffy and rock edge to it. And this does kind of overlap with the Zool genre a little bit. Bands like Magma, because I believe Daniel Denis was actually in Magma for a short period of time. But This is a fantastic album, and it's one of those records that just totally sets the mood for me, as well as, I would say, the other Univers Zero albums from around that time, such as the debut and Sous du Dehors, aka Those on the Outside. All of these albums have this like Chamber of Horrors sound to them, but they're also very melodic and kind of riffy, and it will push you at times to the edge of what is listenable. But then it'll bring you back. Like it sends you out pretty far, and then it brings you back. And that's what I really love about this music. And the opening track on Heresie has some of the scariest chanting and whispers I've ever heard on a record. And it's very unsettling stuff, very tense, very dissonant. So if any of this sort of thing sounds interesting to you, or even if you're more interested in kind of the more compositional and less funny side of, say, somebody like Frank Zappa, I can't recommend Univers Zero highly enough. And those first three albums are the place to start. So next up, a much more traditional choice, a much more accessible choice, and that's Tales of Mystery and Imagination by the Alan Parsons Project. Now, some of you may know the Alan Parsons Project best by their hits, such as the Eye in the Sky album with songs like Sirius. Now, this is pretty far away from that. This is the debut album of the Alan Parsons Project, the collaboration of Eric Wolfson, who is the songwriter, who's unfortunately passed away recently, and Alan Parsons himself, the producer, best known for working with bands like the Beatles and also Pink Floyd. And what you have with an album like Tales of Mystery and Imagination is it's a story of two sides here. So side one is very much in the tradition of Alan's work in rock and roll. And so you hear a lot of Beatles references, you hear a lot of Pink Floyd references, but you also get some really interesting guests, like Arthur Brown of The Crazy World of Arthur Brown shows up and sings lead on The Telltale Heart, which is my favorite track on the album. And to me, I mean, I love Fire, the Crazy World song, and I also love Arthur's work with Kingdom Come. But for me, vocally, this is his best moment, and he's just screaming in your face, and I absolutely love it. It's so exciting, and it's one of those just songs in general that gets me hyped up for the season. And you also have a song like The Raven, which is, I believe, one of the earliest examples of vocoder being used in a pop or progressive song or a rock song. And then side two is a completely different story. Here you have this kind of aleatoric, modern classical influence suite based around the fall of the House of Usher, which just occasionally breaks into some kind of progressive rock moments. And I don't think there's any vocals on the entirety of side two, except for the very last song, which almost treads Beach Boys territory. So there's a lot of like early 70s and late 60s influences coming together. There's the storytelling of Edgar Allan Poe, who's quite possibly my favorite horror writer, making for an album that was formative for me. I think I heard this album, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, long before I heard any progressive rock albums outside of like Tall, some of the early Jethro Tull albums I heard. So this is an album that built me, and if you've never heard it, I would suggest giving it a listen. It's my favorite Alan Parsons Project album, and I'm not alone in that opinion. Alan himself says it's their best. So even if you haven't heard it in a while, it's worth a revisit, and it's just one of those records that's perfect for getting me in the mood for the Halloween season. Next up, I'm sending you folks completely off the deep end with a record that I don't recommend lightly, and that's First Utterance by Comus. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the folk horror genre, which is a genre that I think has always kind of existed, but it's come into more prominence in the mainstream with films like The Witch by Robert Eggers or Midsommar by Ari Aster. However, there's always been kind of this folk horror thing. And I think that the first time we really saw it happen, like in a cultural level, the way that it is sort of in the last few years too, would have been the early 70s with films like The Blood on Satan's Claw, Witchfinder General, and the masterpiece that is The Wicker Man, the original Wicker Man. This album is the musical equivalent of that. It's a progressive folk horror album. And it's almost like death metal, like early death metal with acoustic guitars. In fact, for those of you who are fans of the band Opeth, this album lent a lot of lyrical and song titles for Opeth records, like the phrase, "My arm's your hearse," comes from this album, and so does the Bang of the Hounds. And I think if you listen to this, you can hear a lot of where Opeth got their inspiration from. It's a very dark album. It's full of really creepy lyrics that are going to make you unsettled. So again, it's not one that I recommend lightly, but musically, it's like Jethro Tull in hell. And I would point to the song "The Bite" as being like a mirror universe version of Fat Man. So if you like Jethro Tull and you like horror music, and if you aren't afraid to be a little bit disturbed, I do recommend first Utterance with a caveat. If this sort of life sounds interesting to you, go check it out. And that's a great segue for the next item on our list. And this isn't an album. This is actually a series of boxed sets, and that's the Halloween series from Frank Zappa. Now, to date, we have Halloween 73, which is just a few months before Roxy and Elsewhere was recorded, so a similar band. And we have Halloween 77, which is the basis for the Baby Snakes film. And we have coming very soon Halloween 78, which is the 4-hour monster concert, one of the longest concerts in Frank Zappa's career. That's coming out. It'll probably be out by the time this video is out, actually, because it's coming out Thursday the 24th. And this video will come out the 31st. So you'll be able to listen to that. And then also Halloween 81 came out a few years ago, which I did cover on the channel. It was one of the earliest things I covered on the channel, so it might be a little bit creaky compared to my recent content, but I did talk about it. But as I mentioned at the top of this video, Halloween was Frank Zappa's favorite holiday. And you can kind of see this in his love of monster movies with songs like Cheapness, and even later songs like Goblin Girl. He seemed to have this theme of like a fun Halloween thing running through a lot of his music. So it made sense that Frank would have these legendary concerts in the Palladium at New York City, which became a cultural event where it was a lot of the same people coming back every year, and it was kind of like a family party. And Frank was always in a good mood at these shows, and his guitar playing was usually on fire and very inventive. And there was always just a special atmosphere with these shows. And even though I have reservations about the presentation of these box sets, using some pretty questionable, extras like the masks and that kind of stuff, I'm not a big fan of that. It just kind of drives the price up. But in terms of the content of the music, I really think these are some of the most special and interesting boxes in Frank Zappa's discography. If you're not into the whole costume box thing, which I totally understand, these can be purchased as high-resolution downloads. And there's also single CD editions, which I hesitate to recommend, but the 3-disc version of Halloween 1977 is worth picking up if you can find it. It's very much out of print at the moment, but if you can find it, it's very much worth having. And then, of course, the Baby Snakes film, which I mentioned, kind of captures the air of Halloween night. There's also footage of Halloween 81 in the DVD called The Torture Never Stops. So this is another cost-effective way to kind of get in on the fun and enjoy the unique atmosphere of a Frank Zappa Halloween night performance. Up next, possibly the shortest album on the list, but by no means, does that mean I think any less of it? And that's Acquiring the Taste by Gentle Giant. And while not expressly a Halloween record, there's always been a spooky vibe to this album that I can't quite put my finger on in songs like The Moon is Down and Black Cat, and The Advent of Penurge. it's just got this late October Halloween night feeling to it. And the music is very complex. It's rather esoteric, and it's rather tuneful too, which is surprising when you come back to listen to it, because when you first hear Acquiring the Taste, you might be kind of intimidated by it because there's a lot going on. And, you might argue that it's Gentle Giant at their most experimental. In fact, if you watch the recent interview with Derek Schulman and Tony Visconti, who was the producer for this record, they talked about recording a lot of this stuff to a metronome, not a click track, a metronome, because click tracks weren't really a thing in 1971. But because of that, most of this album was unable to be performed live. So I don't think it quite has the status that maybe some of their other records do, like Octopus or Power and the Glory or Freehand, which were road monsters. But this album is totally special and unique. And if you want something to play during your Halloween party that'll make people go, "What was that?" Try a song like Black Cat. So up next, I'm going to recommend, again, not an album, but a series of movie soundtracks, with one in particular sort of standing head and shoulders, in my opinion, above the rest. And this is, of course, the Italian progressive rock band Goblin, who scored many films for the director Dario Argento, who's one of my absolute favorites. All of the scores that Goblin, or indeed Claudio Simonetti, did for Argento are phenomenal, if you'll excuse my pun. But in my opinion, the best ones, or the most memorable ones, are Deep Red, Suspiria, Phenomena, and also Tenebrae. I think Tenebrae is fantastic, especially the main title theme, which is like progressive disco, with like kind of a Halloween thing running through it, like a spooky thread running through it. But to me, the soundtrack that stands head and shoulders above most other horror soundtracks is, of course, Suspiria. And, to me, the best way to experience these soundtracks is with the films themselves. And if you go and see Goblin, they do play the films in the backdrop as they're playing the soundtrack music. However, it's worth picking up the soundtrack for Suspiria, because Dario Argento, who of course directed the Goblins, as they're credited in the movie, in the main titles, he actually worked with them to create a lot of this stuff. And when the soundtrack recordings were done, I think he cut up a lot of this stuff and just sort of spread it around the film where he felt it worked the best. And it's really interesting to go back to the soundtrack, because there's some music that's not in the movie, and it's also in the movie in a different context. So like, for instance, the main title and end title theme of the film are actually the same track. And hearing it as one 5 or 6 minute track makes it an outstanding progressive rock number. But I do recommend checking out, again, the Suspiria film if you have the taste for horror, especially, Dario Argento's movies are very bloody and gruesome at times. But the film has a great Atmos mix. So if you're watching this and you enjoy a lot of my multi-channel content, I do highly recommend the film Suspiria, especially on 4K or Blu-ray. So you can get that Atmos track, because it's the closest I think we're ever going to get to hearing a Goblin album mixed in Dolby Atmos. But hopefully I'm proved wrong by that. I'm hoping in the future someday we get maybe the Roller album mixed for 5.1 or Atmos. I can dream. Check out Goblin. Goblin are a wonderful band, and I've actually had a couple of requests to cover Italian progressive rock bands, and I thought I'd mention that they're one of my very favorites. So speaking of soundtrack music, or music that could be a soundtrack, I could have picked several Steven Wilson albums, several Opeth albums, to be on my Halloween list, such as The Raven That Refused to Sing. I think would be a perfect choice to play on Halloween night. But instead of picking an Opeth album, picking a Porcupine Tree or Steven Wilson record, I decided to go for Storm Corrosion, which is a collaboration between Steven Wilson and Mikhail Ackerfeld. And I did review Storm Corrosion when the new Atmos mix came out last year. But My feelings on this record haven't changed that much. It's a very atmospheric record. It's almost like a soundtrack to a movie that doesn't exist. And again, it very much exists in that Comus-y folk horror mode. Also, Storm Corrosion have identified Univers as a significant influence. So if you like something like Comus or Univers, the logical conclusion is to go to Storm Corrosion, which is this very sparse album that has jump scares, like a horror film would. Like there's moments where the music gets really soft and then loud. But this isn't traditional rock music by any stretch of the imagination, and it more closely resembles classical music or even somebody like the Third Ear Band, who I would definitely recommend as a reference point for Univers as well. But especially if you haven't heard this album, I think it's worth listening to again. My favorite tracks are Loch Howl, which could work as a great standalone little number, and it also would work as a demonstration for your Atmos system. Or indeed, the first track, Drag Ropes, I think has some wonderful tension and great Halloween vibes. So up next is a record that I'm sure all of you have heard, and you don't need me to tell you about, and that's King Crimson's Red. Now, this might be a little bit of a cheat, because I don't think Red is specifically a scary album, but it has its moments. From the opening of Red, I feel like I'm in a horror film, and when those cellos come in at the middle section, there's something very dark and foreboding about them, but it's really some of the later tracks, I think, that fit the Halloween season even more. Tracks such as One More Red Nightmare, which again feels like it could be a horror film soundtrack. Speaking of horror film soundtracks, there's nothing scarier than the improvisation Providence, which I've heard a few so-called King Crimson fans saying they skipped that track, and I'm in the don't skip Providence crowd. I think it's a wonderful track that starts off a little bit tentative. It doesn't show its power at first, but sort of like a Frankenstein monster just waking up, it slowly gets to its feet, and about halfway through the track, it starts stomping, and oh man, it just sounds like a rampage. And I absolutely love this track, especially in the new Dolby Atmos edition, which really opens it up for me. I should also point to the use of the song Starless in the horror film Mandy, which came out a few years ago. So apparently I'm not the only one who associates King Crimson with scary stuff. So last, but certainly not least, is a album that I'm sure many of you don't have, probably have never heard of, and to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure how to describe. The name of the record is Sister Death by Alec K. Redfearn and the Eyesores. I've seen the Eyesores twice, and I've met Alec K. Redfearn both times, as well as trading some messages over Facebook with him over the years, and he's a wonderful guy. Alec's claim to, I don't know if you want to call it fame, is that he performs the accordion through wah-wah and distortion pedals. So he twists and tortures the accordion beyond recognition. Now, the record that I'm spotlighting is Sister Death, and there's kind of like this Middle Eastern folk music thing running through it, but it also sounds very American to me in ways that I can't quite articulate. And, I hesitate even including Alec K. Redfearn on this list, not because he isn't great. He's one of my very favorite artists, but because I find it a stretch to describe Redfearn as either progressive or rock, period. I think this would fit better in the folk genre, although folk is still way too vague. Just take a moment and check out a song like The Fire Shuffle, which kind of sounds like Jim Morrison in Hell. It reminds me very much of the Roadhouse Blues, with the heavy driving rhythm underneath and some snotty harmonica playing. I just absolutely love this stuff. And a song like The 7 and 6 definitely has that kind of Wicker Man thing going on. Again, I struggle to talk about this record, and that means that it must be heard to be believed. So if any of this sounds even remotely interesting to you, go check it out. Remember, I don't consider this to be progressive. I don't consider this to be rock music. It's Alec music. And for that, I think it deserves your attention. Now, I will be doing a radio show, a Halloween-themed radio show on Prog Rock Radio today. It's going to be released simultaneously with this video. So if you're interested in hearing some, but certainly not all, of the music discussed today, follow the link in the description to listen to my show on progradio.com. And if for any reason you're discovering this video after the Halloween show has aired, you can go to the echo chamber on progradio.com and go listen to it at your leisure. So yeah, don't forget to let me know in the comments if there's any scary prog albums that I missed that you love. And feel free to give me some recommendations too. If you feel that there's anything I missed or I've forgotten about, I could certainly talk about another 10. We could talk about Aphrodite's Child and the 666 record, which is definitely scary. I have work to do, so I'm going to get back to mixing. But it was good talking with you, and you'll hear from me really soon. All right. So long, and happy Halloween.